One of the things we've done in multiple activities is read data from a file to be able to work with that data. So would it be possible to read data from a file related to a programmer-defined data type? We've done it with strings, right? That's a built-in data type, and we've been able to read in data from a file that's a string and store it in a string object. So can we do that with a programmer-defined data type? And the answer is actually we can. So let's figure out how we can do that. I'm going to back up some of this. Let's back this up. And we're done testing this part. And let's just create an array. And in fact, we can get rid of my first and my second. And let's just say that we have this array. Oh, let's clean this up. Notice here where we've just used a number. That's not as good as using a constant, right? Maybe a little on the lazy side. So let's do a const int size, and it's going to be a constant. So we're going to start it with a K for our naming convention for constants, K, and we'll call this max size. And set it equal to 12. And then we can use this K max size here. And that way we can use that value if we need to use it later. And we'll always know the maximum size of that array. Oh, it still has curly brace there. I'm missing a semicolon. That curly line warned me that something was awry. And we've already done all of this testing, so let's get rid of this. And let's leave this loop to print out the array because we'll be using this a lot, right? Well, we'll want to see what happens to our array as we build it. So right now, if we run it, let's see what that array looks like. All we've done is declare an array. And we know when we declare an array of objects, then they have the default value. It calls the default constructor. And so we see a whole array of dice. Each of them have 6 sides, which is the default, and then different values because we changed that the default constructor will randomly generate that value for each dice. And notice they're all within 1 to 6. So that's what we get if we don't do anything. Now here's a file. It's called dice input, and it has dice information. It has number of sides and the value. So here we have the dice and what their current layout is. So can we read those and store them in this array? Well, we know how to read that. We want to loop through the file. We're going to be reading an int, and then an int, and then an int, and then an int. So we can use simply the extraction operator. So let's go ahead and put the things that we know how to do. Okay, so we know we're going to need an ifstream object, and I'm going to call it in. And then we need to associate it with this file. We need to do .. If we're using CLine, we've got to go up 2 folders, and then we find this file, dice_input.txt. And there we've opened an input file, and now because it's an input file, we want to test if it fails. So if in.fail, then we want to shut down the program because we can't do anything without the data. So cout unable to open file, shutting down. Okay, and that's our catch in case we test it to make sure that it opened. And if it doesn't open, then we shut the program down. So this is how we do input files. And now if we remember back to how we read them, we're going to go through them and read them one at a time. First, a number of sides, and then a value. Number of sides, and then the current value. So let's do that. And we want to read to the end of the file. We don't know how many are in here. So we're going to use a while loop, and we'll read in, and we'll read that first value. And the first value is a number of sides. So let's go ahead and create variables for these. Int number of sides. And then the next value is going to be the value. So we'll need variables for both of those. So let's go ahead and do the number of sides. And we know that when we do this loop, that as long as this reads a value, it will be true. And as soon as it tries to read past the end of the file, it will be false. So reading this will continue the loop until it gets to the end of the file. So if we read in a number of sides, so whether we read in this one or the very last one, if we read number of sides, we know we're going to have a value. So we'll do that inside the loop. We'll read the value. And now we have the number of sides and the value. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to create a dice and store it in the array. And so now we've got the number of sides, which is what we need to create the dice for the constructor. And then we can set the value because we have the value amount. So we want to be able to move through this array. Now, since we're using a while loop, we don't have the looping variable I to use for the index. So we're going to have to manually keep track of the index. So we're going to need an integer and to keep track of the index. And we want the index to start at 0. And then we'll have to manually update it. So we started at 0, and then we need to update it. And now we know we're going to put in the array, we're going to put my dice. Where are we going to put it? At the current index, so it starts at 0. And we're going to say we want this element to be equal to a new dice. And the way we can create a new dice is to do dice and send it a value. So here we're going to put the number of sides. What this will do is this will create a new object of type dice with the number of sides. So this is calling that constructor with this value number of sides. And that's going to create an object, and that object will be stored in this array. So once we do that in my dice 0, then we want to increment index for the next time through the loop. So next time it will be 1. So we don't want to start with 0. We want to start with index, right? We need to use the variable. Instead of 0 directly, we want to use this variable index because we want it to change every time. So the first time it's going to be 0. My index 0 equals this new dice. And then we increment index, so now it's equal to 1. And then we go up, and what do? We read in a number of sides, and we read in a value. And then we say my dice 1 equals a new dice, now with the number of sides. Okay, so now we're reading in the number of sides and creating the dice, but we're not using the value. So let's do that and see what we get. We're not done, but at least it gives us an idea where we're at, just reading in the number of sides. And we'll see if they match. So now we have number of sides. We have 8, 8, 8, 6, 6. Let's go compare that to dice input. 8, 8, 8, 6, 6. And then 12, 12, 10, 8, 12, 10, 8, 12, and then 2 6s. What are these 2 6s? Those are the default values, right? When the array was originally created, it created 12 default dice and filled up that array with default dice. Then we did a while loop, and read to the end of file, which had 10 values, right? So it read all 10 of those, then it hit the end of the file and stopped. And it read all of those in and stored them in the array. So there's the 10 dice that were in the file, and then the 2 that were the default ones originally there.